CBS News has obtained an audio recording, which is part of the classified documents case against former President Trump.
And the recording seems to contradict some of the former president's statements in the case thus far. CBS 2's Dick Brennan live now in the newsroom with more. Dick.
Well, Maurice and Christine, the recording from 2021 comes from an interview Trump gave to people working on a memoir of Mark Meadows. It could, at the very least, complicate Trump's defense or perhaps pose serious trouble.
He said he wanted to attack Iran and what? He said this was done by the military, given to me.
Donald Trump describing a sensitive document he appears to be holding in the presence of two people who have no national security clearance. He's talking about a secret plan drawn up by the Joint Chiefs Chairman Mark Milley and the Defense Department in regards to Iran.
Let's see here.
Yeah.
I just found, isn't that amazing? This totally wins my case, you know. Except it is like highly confidential, secret. This is secret information. Look at this.
All right, guys, welcome back. John here. So what just happened? A verified audio recording captures Trump at Bedminster, discussing highly confidential Pentagon war plans, saying, "As president, I could have declassified it. Now I can't." Explicitly acknowledging the material remained classified and his authority to change that had expired. Former federal prosecutors have called it a confession tape, making it one of the most damning evidentiary pieces against him. The existence of this recording first came to light through CNN's reporting and was subsequently confirmed by Reuters and CBS News, who aired actual audio excerpts for public consumption. The content of those excerpts is genuinely stunning when you actually listen to them. Trump is heard rustling through papers that he describes as confidential and secret, discussing military plans that he acknowledges were prepared by the Pentagon and given to him during his presidency. And then, with people in the room who had no business hearing any of this.
The recording appears to contradict Trump's recent claim that he didn't have any documents with him.
I didn't have a document per se. There was nothing to declassify. These were newspaper stories, magazine stories.
The recording could prove to be key evidence in Special Counsel Jack Smith's indictment of the former president over alleged mishandling of classified documents.
See, as president, I could have declassified. No, I can't, but this is classified.
A former Trump attorney says this recording poses a real problem for Trump's defense.
One of the things he's been saying all along is that he could just, wave a magic wand and these documents are declassified.
But a campaign spokesman says the tape proves Trump did nothing wrong.
He's going to say that he never had a document in his hand up in Bedminster, New Jersey, and that he was just waving around some papers willy-nilly, but he was bragging, which is what he tends to do.
Trump's trial for the government documents case is scheduled for August 14th, but Trump's lawyers are expected to ask to push the trial back to a later date.
He makes the admission that his own legal team would later try to deny. He says he can't declassify the documents anymore. That is not ambiguous. That is not open to interpretation. That is a direct statement from a former president acknowledging the classified status of materials in his possession and acknowledging that he no longer has the legal authority to change that status. Legal analysts who reviewed the tape have described it as a triple kill, one recording that simultaneously demolishes three separate defense arguments that Trump might have made. The first defense was that there was no actual document to begin with, but Trump describes the material on tape. The second defense was that everything was already declassified, but Trump admits he can't declassify it anymore. The third defense was that he didn't know the material remained classified, but he openly discusses its classified status with people who lack clearance.
Good evening. We begin tonight with breaking news. We have obtained what is expected to be a central piece of the government's case against Donald Trump. The actual audio recording of the former president talking as if he's showing a highly classified document on U.S. war plans against Iran with people not cleared to even know it exists, let alone what's in it. In a moment, only on CNN, you will hear what jurors will hear one day. The recording was made 2 summers ago, July 2021, at the former president's club in Bedminster, New Jersey. You will clearly hear the former president as he is speaking to several people. According to the special counsel's indictment, they include a writer working on Mark Meadows' memoir, the publisher, and 2 of Trump's staff members. The president was aware he was being recorded. This is the first time it is being played publicly.
These are bad, sick people.
That was your coup, against you.
Well, it started right at the
like
beginning.
when Millie's talking about, oh, you were going to try to do a coup. No, they were trying to do that before you even were sworn in. That's right. Trying to overthrow your election.
Well, with Millie, let me see that. I'll show you an example. He said that I wanted to attack Iran. Isn't it amazing? I have a big pile of papers. This thing just came up. Look. This was him. They presented me this. This is off the record, but they presented me this. This was him. This was the Defense Department and him.
Now, it is important to be precise about what this recording actually represents, because the most sensational headlines have distorted the story into something it isn't. Trump did not confess to murder on this tape. He did not confess to anything that most people would consider a fatal crime in the everyday sense of that word. What he did do is far more consequential in legal terms. He provided prosecutors with his own voice, his own words, his own acknowledgement that he possessed classified material after leaving office, and that he knew it remained classified. That is not a confession to violence, but it is a confession to conduct that the Justice Department has consistently treated as criminal. The distinction matters because it separates the real story from the exaggerated version. The real story is that prosecutors had devastating evidence that directly undercut Trump's legal defenses in one of the most serious cases ever brought against a former president.
We looked at some. This was him. This wasn't done by me. This was him. All sorts of stuff. It's pages long. Look. Wait a minute. Let's see here.
Yeah.
I just found, isn't that amazing? This totally wins my case, you know. Except it is like highly confidential, secret. This is secret information. But look at this. You attack, and
Hillary would print that out all the time, you know.
she'd send
Private
it,
email.
no, she'd send it to Anthony Weiner,
Yeah.
the pervert.
Please print.
By the way, isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
I was just saying, because we were talking about it. And, you know, he said he wanted to attack Iran and what? These are the
You
papers.
did. It's pretty,
This was done by the military, given to me. I think we can probably, right?
I don't know. We'll have to see. Yeah, we'll have to try to
Declassified.
figure out yeah.
See, as president, I could have declassified
Yeah.
it. Now I can't, you know, but this is
Yeah,
classified.
now we have a problem.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
It's so cool. I mean, it's so, look, here and I have,
The exaggerated version is that Trump confessed to something far more dramatic. Understanding that distinction is essential for accurately following what actually happened. But the Bedminster recording is only half of this story. There is a second recording from an entirely different case that deserves equal attention because it actually produced a real conviction. This is the recording from 2016, captured secretly by Trump's then personal attorney Michael Cohen, in which Trump is heard discussing the mechanics of paying to silence a story from Karen McDougal before the presidential election. On that tape, Trump can be heard asking Cohen, "So what do we got to pay for this?" That recording became central evidence in the New York hush money trial, the one case among all of Trump's legal battles that actually went to a jury and produced a unanimous guilty verdict on all 34 counts. The jurors heard Trump's own voice discussing payment logistics.
and you probably almost didn't believe me, but now you believe me.
No, I believe
It's
you.
incredible, right?
No,
Hey, bring some Cokes in, please.
Well, joining us now, CNN anchor and chief correspondent Caitlin Collins, also our senior legal affairs correspondent Paula Reed. Caitlin, first of all, what do you make? This is the first time we are hearing this audio. We'd seen a transcript. There's more in this audio than we actually had seen, I think, in the transcript. What stands out to you?
Yeah, there is more in this. And this is a 2-minute clip of what a recording that we're told is over an hour long. But this is, of course, the part that is at the center of Jack Smith's investigation. And we knew about this. You know, CNN first reported that this existed and that Jack Smith's prosecution had it in their hands. But to hear it, I think really just drives home and it undercuts everything that Trump has been saying. I mean, even as of a few days ago, he was saying there was no document per se, but you can hear him very clearly in there referencing something in his hands.
You can hear him shuffling through papers.
And he's not just saying, here's this document. He very clearly appears to be showing it to them.
He
of
says,
course,
look.
Only the people in the room could know that, but you can hear in that why this is so critical to Jack Smith's case, because it's Trump acknowledging, I have this document.
And they found him guilty. That conviction remains on the books today. The judge in that case imposed an unconditional discharge, meaning no jail time or fine, largely reflecting the unique circumstances of sentencing a president-elect. But the conviction itself stands as the one completed criminal case among all of Trump's various legal battles. The contrast between these two recordings is instructive. One involved national security secrets discussed at a private club with unqualified people in the room. The other involved the business mechanics of a hush money payment discussed with a personal attorney. Different subject matter, different legal theories, different cases entirely, connected only by the fact that both feature Trump's own recorded voice contradicting his later public statements. The legal significance of the Bedminster recording cannot be overstated, even though the case connected to it never actually reached a jury. Special counsel Jack Smith's team treated this tape as absolutely critical evidence in the classified documents case, and legal analysts have explained exactly why it mattered so much. Trump's defense rested on three core arguments. First, that there wasn't really a specific document at all. Second, that everything he had was already declassified. Third, that even if something remained classified, he simply didn't know it. The recording demolished all three simultaneously. On tape, Trump describes the material as highly confidential, contradicting the claim there was no real document. He directly says he can't declassify it anymore, contradicting the claim everything was already declassified. And by openly discussing the material's classified status with people in the room who had no security clearance, he demonstrated he understood exactly what it was and what his status meant. That is why analysts called it a triple kill, one recording eliminating three separate defense arguments all at once. But here is where the story becomes genuinely complicated. The Bedminster recording never actually got presented to a jury because the classified documents case itself never reached trial. In a ruling that stunned legal observers, Judge Eileen Cannon, a Trump appointee, dismissed the entire case, finding that Jack Smith's appointment as special counsel had been unconstitutional in the first place. Smith appealed that ruling, but after Trump won re-election, the Justice Department dropped the case entirely, following long-standing policy that a sitting president cannot face federal criminal prosecution. The tape's power as evidence and the case's actual outcome are two completely different things. The tape was extraordinarily powerful, but the case collapsed for reasons that had nothing to do with the recording's content and everything to do with a separate legal dispute over how the prosecution itself had been structured. That distinction is crucial for understanding what actually happened here. The evidence existed. The evidence was devastating. The evidence never got tested in front of an actual jury. Judge Cannon went even further after dismissing the case. She permanently blocked the release of Smith's final report covering the classified documents investigation, ruling that releasing it would create a manifest injustice for Trump and his co-defendants, given that the case had been dismissed. That means the full context and analysis that prosecutors developed around the Bedminster recording, exactly how they planned to present it to a jury, what additional corroborating evidence they had assembled, remains locked away from public scrutiny. Cannon specifically noted that Trump and his co-defendants still enjoy the presumption of innocence, given that the case ended in dismissal rather than any actual determination of guilt or innocence on the underlying facts. That is an important legal distinction, but it also leaves the broader public without access to the complete picture that prosecutors had assembled. The detailed prosecutorial findings surrounding the recording remain sealed from public view entirely, at least for now. That sealing decision is worth sitting with because it means there is a significant amount of information about this case that the public simply does not have access to. The Cohen recording from 2016 represents something genuinely different in kind from the Bedminster tape. This wasn't Trump discussing military secrets. This was Trump personally discussing the mechanics of paying to silence a damaging story before an election. Specifically, the details of how to actually structure that payment, the logistics of the arrangement, the amount of money involved. This recording became part of the evidentiary backbone in Trump's hush money trial, the one case among his various legal battles that actually went all the way through to a jury verdict. Jurors heard Trump's own voice discussing payment logistics, directly undercutting any claim that he was unaware of or uninvolved in the arrangement. The jury ultimately convicted him on all 34 counts, making this the one case where a recording of Trump's own voice actually helped produce an actual unanimous guilty verdict from 12 ordinary citizens. The outcome of that case is often glossed over in broader discussions of Trump's legal history. Following the conviction, the judge imposed what's called an unconditional discharge, meaning no jail time, no fine, no probation. But the conviction itself, the actual jury finding of guilt on all 34 counts, remains on the books. It stands as the one completed criminal case among all of Trump's various legal battles where a jury actually reached a final verdict. What most people scrolling past the dramatized clips are actually missing is the complexity of this story. These aren't recordings of Trump confessing to murder or to anything resembling what most people would consider fatal crimes in the everyday sense, but they represent something arguably more consequential in legal terms. Trump's own voice, in his own words, directly contradicting his own public defenses in two completely separate serious cases. One of those cases collapsed for procedural reasons unrelated to the recording's power. The other actually went to trial and produced a conviction that still stands. The distinction matters enormously for accurately following the story because it separates what actually happened from what the most sensational headlines claim happened. The real story is more nuanced. Prosecutors genuinely possess devastating audio evidence in two separate cases, evidence legal experts consistently described as extraordinarily powerful. One recording never got its day in court because the case around it collapsed for unrelated reasons. The other became central evidence in the one case that actually produced a real standing conviction. There is something worth understanding about why recordings like these carry so much unique weight in legal proceedings generally. Unlike witness testimony, which can be challenged, reinterpreted, or discredited through cross-examination, an actual audio recording captures someone's exact words in their own voice at the actual moment they said them. That kind of evidence is extraordinarily difficult to argue around because there's no ambiguity about what was actually said, only debate over what it ultimately means. That is exactly why legal analysts use language like evidentiary gold when describing the Bedminster tape specifically, because that kind of direct, unfiltered evidence is genuinely rare in any criminal case, let alone one involving a former president. Most criminal cases depend heavily on witness accounts, circumstantial evidence, or documents that require additional context and interpretation to actually prove intent. A recording of the defendant himself describing his own understanding of a situation in real time largely eliminates that interpretive gap. Juries don't have to rely on someone else's account of what Trump knew or believed. They can hear it directly in his own words. That is precisely why defense attorneys generally consider this kind of evidence among the hardest to counter effectively at trial. The honest, complicated truth sitting underneath all the exaggerated headlines is this: Trump never confessed to fatal crimes on any recording that actually exists, but prosecutors genuinely did possess devastating audio evidence in two separate cases. Evidence legal experts consistently described as extraordinarily powerful. One recording never got its day in court because the case around it collapsed for unrelated reasons. The other became central evidence in the one case that actually produced a real standing conviction. The distinction is crucial. The Bedminster recording was genuinely devastating evidence described by legal analysts as eliminating three separate core defenses simultaneously. That's not exaggeration. That's a consistent assessment from multiple former prosecutors who actually reviewed the tape's contents and understood exactly how it undercut Trump's stated legal position, even without ever reaching a jury. Its existence and content remain a documented, verified part of the historical legal record. But that same recording never actually got tested in front of a jury because the classified documents case collapsed for reasons entirely separate from the recording's content. Understanding that distinction matters enormously for accurately following what actually happened here, since it means the recording's legal power was never actually tested against the defense response in open court. The Cohen recording represents something genuinely different, real evidence that actually reached a real jury and helped produce an actual standing conviction on all 34 counts. That's the one instance among all of Trump's various recorded conversations where audio evidence translated directly into a completed legal outcome, one that remains part of his permanent legal record, regardless of subsequent political developments. The The contrast between these two recordings and their outcomes is a powerful reminder that evidentiary strength and legal consequences don't always move together the way people assume they will. It's tempting to think the strongest evidence automatically produces the most severe consequences, but that's simply not how the legal system actually functions in practice. Procedural questions like whether a prosecutor was legally appointed in the first place can end a case entirely, regardless of how devastating the underlying evidence might have been. That's exactly what happened here, and it's a genuinely important lesson for understanding any complex legal story, not just this specific one involving Trump. Judge Cannon's subsequent decision to permanently block release of Smith's final report on the classified documents investigation means the full detailed findings connected to the Bedminster recording remain sealed from public view. That adds another layer of incompleteness to how this specific story has actually played out and leaves significant unanswered questions about exactly what additional evidence prosecutors had assembled. The report reportedly contains extensive additional detail about exactly how prosecutors plan to use this recording had the case actually reached trial, but that detail remains inaccessible to the public, at least for now. It's worth remembering that the detailed prosecutorial findings surrounding this specific recording were extensive. Legal analysts who have seen portions of the evidence that were made public have described a comprehensive case built around multiple forms of corroborating evidence, not just the recording itself. Photographs showing classified documents stored in a ballroom and even in a bathroom at Mar-a-Lago, not in any kind of secure facility. Testimony from witnesses who observed Trump's handling of classified materials. And the recording itself, Trump's own voice acknowledging the classified status of the documents he possessed. Together, prosecutors argued this combination showed Trump willfully retained sensitive national defense information, understood exactly what he had, and then later made public statements that contradicted what he said privately on tape. The fact that this case never reached a jury means we will never know how a jury would have weighed that evidence. But the evidence itself remains part of the historical record. It remains documented, verified, and available for legal scholars and historians to study. The broader lesson about how legal outcomes and evidentiary strength don't always move together is worth understanding for anyone trying to follow complex legal stories. It's tempting to assume that the strongest evidence automatically produces the most severe consequences. But that's not how the system actually works. Procedural questions, legal technicalities, political considerations, all of these can shape outcomes in ways that have nothing to do with the underlying strength of the evidence. The Bedminster recording is a perfect example. Devastating evidence, but the case collapsed for reasons unrelated to its content. The Cohen recording from the hush money case is the other side of that coin. Less dramatic content, a discussion about a payment rather than military secrets, but it actually reached a jury and produced a conviction. The contrast reveals something important about how the legal system operates. Both recordings were powerful, but only one of them got tested in front of a jury. The outcome of that test was a guilty verdict on all 34 counts. The fact that one recording produced a conviction and the other never reached a jury says more about procedural and political factors than it does about the strength of the evidence. The Bedminster recording was described by multiple former prosecutors as evidentiary gold, but procedural questions about the prosecution's legitimacy prevented it from ever being presented to a jury. The Cohen recording, less dramatic in its content, actually made it to trial and convinced 12 jurors to convict. The real story is more nuanced than the headlines suggest. Trump never confessed to fatal crimes on any recording, but prosecutors genuinely possessed devastating evidence in 2 separate cases. The ongoing significance of these recordings extends far beyond the immediate legal outcomes. The Bedminster tape remains part of the historical record of what actually happened during the classified documents investigation, regardless of how the case itself concluded. Legal scholars and historians will likely continue studying and referencing it for years, precisely because it represents such a clear, unusually direct piece of evidence in a case that ultimately never reached its natural conclusion through trial, That kind of unresolved, powerful evidence tends to generate lasting interest, specifically because the underlying legal questions were never fully answered by a jury. The Cohen recording, meanwhile, represents the one completed criminal case among all of Trump's various legal battles where a jury actually reached a final verdict. That conviction stands as a permanent part of Trump's legal record, even if the sentence was minimal. Between the sealed status of Smith's final report on the classified documents case, ongoing questions about whether that material could ever become public, and the standing hush money conviction, this story about Trump's own recorded words is far from a closed chapter. Who actually benefits from understanding the real version of this story? And what should you genuinely take away from it going forward? Understanding the real distinction here protects you from an exaggerated version that claims Trump confessed to fatal crimes, while also making sure you don't underestimate just how genuinely powerful this evidence actually was. According to the legal experts who reviewed it directly, both extremes miss the real, more nuanced truth. The Bedminster recording was devastating evidence, but it never reached a jury. The Cohen recording was different, less dramatic in subject matter, but it actually produced a conviction. Understanding that distinction matters for accurately following any future developments in these cases. Watch for whether any additional details from Smith's blocked report ever become public through some future legal proceeding, congressional inquiry, or eventual court order overturning Cannon's sealing decision. The report reportedly contains extensive additional detail that remains concealed from public view. Watch for whether the Cohen recording and the broader hush money conviction faces any further appeals or legal challenges that could affect its current standing status. And watch closely for how these two recordings and the broader story of Trump's own recorded words being used as evidence against him continue shaping public understanding of his overall legal history, regardless of how any individual case ultimately resolved. It's also worth remembering that these aren't the only recorded moments that have surfaced across Trump's various legal battles over the years. Multiple different cases spanning classified documents, election interference, and business record falsification have each generated their own specific pieces of evidence. Some stronger than others, some never fully tested in court, some that actually reached juries and produced real verdicts. Understanding this specific pair of recordings accurately gives you a genuinely useful framework for evaluating similar claims that will likely keep surfacing about Trump's other ongoing or historical legal matters. So, does a star prosecutor actually hold a lethal recording of Trump confessing to his most fatal crimes, yet the way that dramatic headline suggests? Not in the literal sense of fatal crimes, no. And no such confession to anything resembling murder or violence exists in any real recording. But did prosecutors genuinely possess devastating in his own voice evidence that directly contradicted Trump's stated legal defenses in two completely separate serious cases? Yeah, absolutely. That part is completely real. Legal experts have consistently described this evidence using exactly the kind of forceful language, evidentiary gold, confession tape that made this story worth taking seriously in the first place, even without any exaggeration attached to it. It's worth reflecting on why this particular story keeps generating such dramatically inflated headlines in the first place, because the pattern itself is revealing. Genuinely powerful legal evidence involving a former president's own recorded voice is already a compelling story on its own merits. It doesn't actually need embellishment about confessions to fatal crimes to hold public attention. The fact that it keeps getting inflated anyway suggests something about how quickly accurate, nuanced legal reporting gets flattened into simpler, more sensational narratives once it starts circulating widely online, losing the actual complexity that makes the real story worth understanding in the first place. There's also something worth remembering about the ongoing significance of these recordings, even years after they first surfaced. The Bedminster tape remains part of the historical record of what actually happened during the classified documents investigation, regardless of how the case itself concluded. Legal scholars and historians will likely continue studying and referencing it for years, precisely because it represents such a clear, unusually direct piece of evidence in a case that ultimately never reached its natural conclusion through trial. That kind of unresolved, powerful evidence tends to generate lasting interest, specifically because the underlying legal questions were never fully answered by a jury. All right, that's it for this one, but keep a close eye on this story, because between the sealed status of Smith's final report on the classified documents case, ongoing questions about whether that material could ever become public, and the standing hush money conviction that remains part of Trump's legal record, this story about his own recorded words is far from a closed chapter.